Button. I should know the buttons by now. Hello. We'll call the meeting to order. Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The meeting has been posted according to open meeting laws.
Excellent. Roll call.
Acting President Alexander.
Here.
Trustee Brunici.
Here.
Commissioner Batani.
Here.
Commissioner Hayes. Commissioner Leaderhouse.
Here.
Commissioner Morath. And Commissioner Seeger.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. First item is citizen participation. Per Village Resolution 2017-01, anyone wishing to address the Plan Commission during citizen participation will be allowed 5 minutes. Your subject must specifically relate to the matters under the jurisdiction of the Plan Commission, whether on the agenda or not. The Plan Commission should not engage in discussion regarding comments because it was not part of the publicly noticed agenda. Upon conclusion of this citizens' participation segment, members of the audience are not allowed further comment unless they are participating in a public hearing or if specifically allowed by a majority vote of the Plan Commission due to any involvement in the agenda items. That said, do we have anyone who wishes to participate in citizens' participation tonight? Tom?
Tom Senft, 2141 Church Street, in regard to Oak Ridge Cemetery. A couple of things. First of all, at the last meeting, I encouraged everyone here to go over to the cemetery and look at what the actual problem is. I don't know if any of you did, but that would certainly help. Kind of hard to make a decision sitting here if you have not looked at it. A couple other things. My own view of it, where the retention pond is right now, I don't believe that we're going to be able to really do any planting of trees or anything along that stretch because of the way that whole edge was cut and as close as it is to the cemetery itself. I don't envision anything being planted there that's going to stay. Possibly only some type of a fence. The area that's right up against the Starbucks, planting could be done there, a fence could be done there. At the last meeting, I mentioned a discussion that I had with Benchmark Landscaping. Sometime after the meeting, a week or so, a comment came to me was, well, you know, Benchmark is awful expensive. You should look around for somebody cheaper. My thought on that is, the village hired Benchmark to do all of the landscaping around the village square. Now, so don't tell me they're too expensive if they could be used for that. One other thing, I did receive a response. A woman had asked me, excuse me, about who to contact. And she contacted Matt, and he commented nicely that they're working on it. Then she contacted Roy Gooden. His comment was, we're not going to do anything until Starbucks is landscaped and done. I can understand that. He ended the conversation with, according to her, ma'am, I don't know what you're upset about anyway. Take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else want to participate with citizen participation? Go.
That one. Just not much room on here all the time. Evening, Kirk Stanford. I live at 2955 Union Street. Again, I was here last meeting, but more of mine is on the discussion. So item 3, with the setback requirements and ordinance or amendment of that. So again, I'm speaking just in regards primarily about my location, my address. zoning district, TR8. A lot of the people around me are all in that same TR8, right? My wife and I taking walks or whatever, looking at all the other properties in relation to like the driveways, their garages. A lot of the properties are, the buildings are right on the lot lines. So when it comes to your guys' consideration for any changes to the ordinance or thereof, there's not much more I can say, just that a lot of the properties within the historical village portion right around the square and shortly outlying from there are a lot in non-conformance. So when it comes to the zoning, there's going to be a lot of instances where this may end up coming up just because of how tight things have changed with the zoning code. So that's all I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for citizen participation? Tom?
Yeah, Tom Ross Miller, 3014 Graydon Avenue, East Troy, Wisconsin. I'm here on item number 2, and the only thing that I saw here that was concerning to me, it says on the last part of the sentence, it says bordering a parcel not assigned a zoning district. The zoning district at the cemetery is P2 and A3. So as far as it not being assigned a zoning district, it's not assigned a village zoning district, but it is in the town of East Troy. And I think in the future that it would be very, to me, I wouldn't care if it was Elkhorn or any place else in the world, that municipalities would respect other municipalities' zoning districts and recognize them. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else for citizen participation? Anybody else? Okay, we'll close citizen participation and move on to the approval of the July 8th meeting minutes.
Make a motion to approve the July 8th minutes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And I'll abstain. Miscellaneous business, conditional use for the incidental outdoor display at 2616 South Executive Drive, RA 4987-00002, MDC East Troy LLC, Manthey. Josh Manthey, agent. The application number 2024-07. At this point, I'll open a public hearing on this topic. And
I'll give
Lauren, you wanna take care of it?
I'll give
Thank
mine
you.
for the record for the public hearing, just my introduction here. So you all know this item better than myself, having lived through the first several aspects of it. So this is coming back for the last component of what this particular petitioner is looking for, which is to have some incidental outdoor display associated with their business. And they've also shown on their site plan that was included in the packet materials, the removal of a chain link fence 6 feet tall with mesh windscreen on the east side of the outdoor storage yard. I've given some items that were previously adopted, just as a reminder. So there was a change to the screening requirements for this type of instance, with this particular development in mind. And as far as what's being proposed for this display area, there's a couple pictures in your packet materials from a similar location from this company that show exactly what this A-frame product display will look like. It's on a paved surface similar to what's being proposed here at this location. So it's really just for someone to walk down the aisle and get a glimpse at all the different options that this particular manufacturer provides.
really an outdoor display area?
Yep.
As such?
Which I think is, pretty aesthetically pleasing. So you also have in your packet a draft of the conditional use order for this item. And as far as my staff review, I don't have any issues or concerns with what's being proposed. You've got a draft motion to recommend approval to the village board, subject to the conditions in the document.
The rest of the commission have any concerns or comments? 40.
I have one question, and I guess I'm just, this is more for Oren, but I guess with this addition, or, I don't know, we call it adjustment, change, is, the question I have is, if the business is sold, moves, or a different entity moves in, does this ruling go with the property or the business?
So I would say that this is specific to this business. And, should somebody come in the future and want to continue this, I think there would be a process for them to be able to do that, because it wouldn't be like for like. It could be a different business with a different type of displays, probably where your mind was leading. So at that time, they could come in to amend it for their own purposes, yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about this conditional use? If not, I'd entertain, that's right, we're in public hearing. Anything from the public with regard to this conditional use? Okay, then I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion on this topic.
I'll make a motion to the village board, accept this proposal under the 5 conditions stated in the application here.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on, as soon as my iPad does. Okay, we'll go on to ordinance code amendments. Continued discussion and direction of staff regarding potential code amendment relating to polystructures and cargo containers as accessory uses in residential zoning districts. Looks like this has been on the agenda for some time.
It has, indeed.
Been whittling away at it. Orin,
are.
did you want to talk to this?
So at the last meeting, and I've got a brief synopsis in here of what took place, we've now put some of the ideas that we've been talking about into the actual ordinance form. So I've divvied it up 3 ways. So just to make it more digestible, I guess, you've got one for the carport canopies as accessory buildings in residential districts, one for portable on-demand storage units, which is, again, just amending the language that was existing in the code, and then adding one for cargo containers as temporary uses. Again, that use existed, we're just tweaking some language to acknowledge a definition for cargo containers, and that those are something that's contemplated in that storage temporary use that already exists. And so the next, the direction, I guess, that we're looking for would be for us to schedule a public hearing so that we can have that and then have you all pass this along to the board for their consideration. So that would be our intent. The dates that I've highlighted in the draft ordinances are all hypothetical. Obviously, this would be a potential path for this item. If it doesn't go that route, then we will shift those accordingly.
Does anyone have any additional comments or concerns about this?
thought it was worded well. I think you took what our commentary was about the requests and long in the tooth on some of the verbiage, but I think that covers us really well.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So for the cargo containers, I don't see a time frame. I thought we talked about some kind of time frame of 9 months or a year or something like that.
So what's in the code currently for that storage item, so temporary construction storage, is that the structure or container shall be removed within 10 days of issuance of occupancy permit. So technically, and then it goes on to say, projects requiring the structure or cargo container to be in place for more than a year, essentially, shall require a conditional use permit. So none of those, we're not changing any of those conditions. So you can, up to a year, you have 10 days after your occupancy to get rid of it. If you're going to go longer than a year, you need a CU. That just all stays the same.
So if I was doing a construction project at my house and I gutted my house and it took me 6 months, I can have the cargo container there the whole time?
If you followed the temporary use approval process, yes, you could.
Thank you.
Yep.
I've got a question. Excuse me, of course, right? And again, I'm just curious, when the size of the cargo container, I know that you mentioned it, it's more like those portable containers that U-Haul and the pods have, that where you move furniture in, you can ship it across the country. But what I'm concerned about is somebody using a cargo container like the ones that were on that ship that hit the bridge in Baltimore, those real big things. Is there any limit on size of these things? The actual cargo container?
So in our definition of cargo container, we're not including a size. There is a standard size that these things are, because that's obviously what the shipping industry relies on for their purposes. So whatever would meet that definition, as far as the temporary construction storage is concerned, the size is really only limited by the percentage of the property's gross site area, which is already one of the standards for that temporary use. So F4 in our draft language here, it says the structure or cargo container shall be limited to a maximum area not exceeding 10% of the property's gross site area. So whatever your temporary construction storage is, whether it's a cargo container or a storage yard area or some other type of structure, that's the limitation on the size for that. I'll just, as an aside, throw out that I saw a very creative use of these recently as a billboard along Highway 41. There were 2 of them stacked with a sign on it. So just to add to the potentiality of uses of these, which is ever growing.
What do you think, Scott?
I think that they serve a purpose. Mr. Stanford actually brought a good point up when he was talking about the construction process of some of the buildings in the community. They're necessary nowadays for security, for weather-tight storage of things that you have inside that home. So it's a good use, especially when people have things that are identified in here, such as natural disasters that we cannot predict, but may end up happening to us at some point. So yeah, I think we need to have a use for it, but make sure that we have some kind of regulation on it, so it's not an extended use past any kind of time frame that makes it egregious.
I would just add that I think the most important thing that we've done is draw some lines of distinction. So, when we started this conversation, we were talking about polystructures, which was a whole array of things, and we've tried to narrow down what the tolerance level is in that arena. And then with these cargo containers, we've talked about when and where they're appropriate, and we've now defined what they are. And in our definition, one thing that we're not doing is calling them a structure, right? It is a thing that gets picked up and put on your property. So one of the things that's been in the background, and it was in some of the earlier materials on the topic previously when some of the standards for industrial properties were amended with cargo containers in mind, there were some images of cargo containers as structures. And we haven't broached that subject yet, but I think, you know, we're drawing lines and we're getting organized around when and where they are appropriate currently. And then down the road, if we want to have a conversation about how can these become, you know, structures that the community is okay with, that's a whole different subject for another day.
Any other comments from the commission? Orin, what would you like at this point? A motion or?
Yeah, the direction that we're looking for would, I guess, be a motion to direct staff to notice public hearings for these draft ordinances for the next Plan Commission meeting.
I'll make a motion then that the Plan Commission direct the village board to have a public hearing? Staff meeting, I'm sorry, for the proposed ordinances for the cargo containers and shipping containers as such.
I'll second that. Any other discussion on it? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Item number 2 is discussion and direction to staff regarding potential code amendment related to buffer yard requirements for development proposals bordering on a parcel not assigned a zoning district. Is this the Orange Show?
Yep. So my staff review starts with just a brief recap of what we talked about at our July 8th meeting. So the consensus of the commission was to consider a revision of the zoning ordinance, so buffer yard requirements would also apply to development proposals on properties adjacent parcels that are outside of the village. And the commission directed zoning administrator Orin Sumwalt, myself, to bring examples to the next meeting. So what I've got in the packet would be an example of, well, the current buffer yard requirements. And I've underlined the specific language where it's referencing zoning districts being the main measure currently. So under 510-119A, it states that, there can be potential nuisances and that these nuisances can often occur between adjacent zoning districts. Then in C, it goes on to state that the required level of opacity of a buffer yard is directly related to the degree to which the potential character of development differs between different zoning districts. And then again in D, it goes on to state if a proposed use adjoins a parcel for which a buffer yard is required by the presence of a zoning district boundary, and then it goes on. So one of the things that we discussed at the last meeting was that there could be a different measure rather than zoning districts. You could use land use. And so I've provided an example in here, which would be on page 4 for this particular item. I guess it would maybe be more pertinent to go further ahead even to look at the table that I provided. So I provided the example tables of what the village is currently using. So the attachment 7 required buffer yard opacity values, and then on the left-hand side, you have all of the different zoning districts in the village, and on the right-hand side, the adjacent properties zoning district. And then okay, here's the zoning that my property is, here's the adjacent property, where they meet, that's the opacity level that you have to provide for a buffer yard. And then if you look at attachment number 8, which is the details of what those buffer yard opacity requirements are. And so it gives you a prescribed opacity level, the width, number of landscape points per 100 feet, required structure, if any. So this is all what's currently in place. The example that I provide is a somewhat similar table, only it is based off of land use. So you have subject lot land use on the left side, adjacent lot land use on the right side. In this case, you would go to, eating and drinking, which is where the Starbucks would fall. You would go to institutional, which would be the type of land use associated with a cemetery, and it would be an A. And then back in the text, as an example, the example code language for a type A would require a 5-foot width. In this case, they call it a transition area instead of buffer yard. The two are interchangeable for our purposes for this discussion. The minimum fence/wall height, optional, so they're not saying that a fence or wall is required. And then you have minimum number of landscape elements per 100 lineal feet. So our code goes off of points. This is going off of how many types, or how many of these different types of plantings do you have to have within a 100-foot, length. If you have less than 100 feet, just divide by that. So it's, understory plantings, canopy/evergreen trees, shrubs/native grasses. And then for our purposes, this would require 4 canopy/evergreen trees per 100 lineal feet. So the other thing that I wanted to provide an example of, which is in here as well, would be specific standards for this particular type of use that we're talking about, which is a drive-through. So you can have a drive-through be allowed as either a accessory to whatever the permitted use is. You could just have it be a permitted use, or you could have it be a conditional use. So regardless of if it's a permitted use or a conditional use, you can have specific conditions associated with it that have to be met. So in this case, there's 1 through 13. So 13 different conditions in this example that are specific requirements for a drive-through. And in this case, it's for a drive-through as an accessory use. So they list the permitted uses as an example, maybe a restaurant or a bank or a pharmacy or whatever type of use might have a drive-through associated with it. But regardless of how you do this, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have specific conditions for drive-throughs because they have their own unique issues associated with them. And it's not all around the landscape buffering. Some of the considerations are to do with, does it fit with the character of the building and the architecture and the site maneuvering aspects of this type of use, stacking, drive lane width, those types of things. Are there areas for how many menu boards can you have? The surface of the material, it gets into all kinds of detail. So this is a very detailed example, which I wanted you to see. You can really have a lot of different things if you want to, or you can have you don't have to get this specific. You could still have conditions without getting into this level of detail. So, the other thing I just wanted to point out, which is at the beginning of my staff review, and I apologize for jumping around, but so I looked further at our case study example of why we started this discussion. And the Oak Ridge Cemetery property in the town does have P2 institutional park district on the west side associated with the developed portion of the cemetery, and then A3 landholding district on the east side, which would be the undeveloped portion. There is no corresponding institutional zoning district. So the P2 is an institutional district in the town, in the county. So it's county zoning, right? We don't have an institutional district in the village. So there's no apples to apples. So I really do think the village's standards are specific to the village, because we can't apply that across the line in this instance because there's no comparable institutional zoning district. And my examples that I provide, the property that we're on right now is L1 light industrial, and the high school property is SR4 suburban residential. So those are two institutional uses with different zonings. So there's just no apple-to-apple comparison, unfortunately, given the current structure of the zoning code. So as far as land use goes, the county has a 2050 plan that depicts the Oak Ridge Cemetery property's land use as government and institutional. And the future land use map for the village depicts the Oak Ridge Cemetery property as general commercial. So there's not even an agreement there between, the future land use for the property. And so moving forward, how we want to proceed is really up to you all and what direction you want to take this. So I don't think the code was applied incorrectly at the time. I think independent of there being a requirement for a buffer yard, on a case-by-case basis when reviewing a development and looking at a site plan, you can still determine that given the circumstances of that property and its context in the community, that one would be appropriate, and you could require it. Even if it's just a site plan and not a conditional use, I think you would be within your powers as a plan commission to do that. One of the takeaways from the last meeting was that, again, what's done was done with the other project. It got its approval, it got its, site plan approved, and if they come back for something, you can bring it up again, or we work outside of the normal approval process and basically ask politely for the developer to be a good neighbor and do something, which seems to be the path that is being taken. For other projects that have not yet been approved, any future amendment to the code would apply to those projects, so when they came in for approval. Now, even if you don't do anything, and even if the code says you don't have to do a buffer yard for an adjacent property if it doesn't have village zoning, I think you still could require it. Again, given just best practices, common sense, looking at that property in its context to its surroundings, you could prescribe that if you felt that it was appropriate.
So is that going to be something that we could make a decision on here, just at this level, or is this something that goes into a development agreement with the developer at certain points or stages in each development?
So I think at this point, we're contemplating, do we want to pursue an amendment to the code? Or do you just want to go about differently how it gets applied, in the future? So without making any changes, you could still, for the next developments in that area, require a buffer yard. And, you'd be within your rights to do that as a
Through
planning
the
commission.
development agreement process? Or-
Just through the site plan process. Yeah, and, I mean, typically the stuff that's getting covered in the development agreement are items that are public improvements, and, how does that get paid for and then turned over and accepted? The, just general landscaping, if it's in an easement, I've seen it done, maybe like for a subdivision in the development agreement, but it doesn't necessarily have to be.
So this individual developer has a lot of land left to develop. So most likely, in his best interest, to do something that's pleasing to the adjacent property, i.e. the cemetery, and maybe just a conversation with him about that helps make that an expedited process. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where he's at with things, but maybe that's something that needs to be done.
Well, and I think now would be the time because I don't know that he has anyone under contract for the rest of those lots, so. The question is, do you make it formal, i.e. ordinance change, or do you make it informal through a
I think-
developer's agreement?
I think we already had the opportunity to do this, and I think it was just missed. We had the site plan opportunity to identify this. I've been with this planning commission for a long time. Skipped a year, but I've been in it for a long time. And I remember a lot of different developments where we've had extensive conversations about the site plan and plantings and buffer areas for some certain items. So I think we have it in our control already. It's just something that was an oversight in this individual situation. I'll call Ray myself and have a conversation with him and see how he feels about the idea of putting up the arborvitaes or something along that line to do that block of the cemetery along the side where that drive-through is. And, he's a reasonable man. He really, truly is. I find him to be a smart man, and knowing that he has other land that he has to develop there. And he's got to come in front of this planning commission again to talk about those items. So I think that just a simple conversation, informal, may start it in the right direction to at least put that buffer up between the cemetery and that Starbucks right now.
Is there something, Scott, you referenced something that was probably missed in the site plan process. Is there some way to note that in the site plan process so that it doesn't get missed in the future?
Not every site plan is perfect.
Yeah.
You try to do as best you can. This is like I said, just a, maybe we as a planning commission are more cognizant of those adjacent properties in the future and really think about our neighbors and what we can do to help them, just because they're not part of our zoning districts, that we can maybe just identify that they do exist and need to keep them in mind. So that can be part of what we should do as a planning commission.
It's a good idea. I had a question in regards to the drive-through screening. There's no page number, oh, I'm sorry, there's number 5, page 5.
Yep.
And again, I'm just wanted to make sure I see this clearly or not, but the drive-through screening, and then you've got A, B, and C, and then 1, 2, 3. Is it A and B and C, or is it one of the three? And then when you get down to the screening, it says shall be a minimum of 6 feet in width and must consist of, and it has 1, 2, and 3. Is it one of the three, or all three, or what is the thought there?
Yeah, in this example, and that's number 13 of the different specific standards for drive-throughs in this instance, it would be all three of those. You'd have to do all three.
It would be A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3?
Yep,
Okay, thank you.
yep.
Any other comments on this topic? Yeah. Do you really need anything from us at this point? So, Orin, are you just looking for a differentiation of preferences from the Plan Commission, whether we want to codify this in an ordinance, or we want to just pay more closer attention to the site planning process?
Yeah, do you want to come up with specific standards for drive-throughs as a potential text amendment to the ordinance? Do you want to amend your buffer yard standards to apply to land uses rather than zoning districts? In which case, I mean, there's actually an example in the code currently where it says for the, and this is a note to this table, which is attachment 7. On the second page, it says for the RH 35, which is the holding district, refer to the future land use map of the village's comprehensive plan for the most likely future zoning district. So in that case, it's going back to land use anyways, because it knows that we don't really know what that could be. So look at the land use plan and see what the future proposed use is, and then correlate that to a zoning district. So I guess by my example, I just wanted you to know that there's not a perfect solution to this. Some communities use zoning, some use land use. If I had to pick a preference, my preference would probably be land use, just because I think that's more universal. You know, I gave my example of how the zoning isn't a perfect fit between the town and the village, because you don't have an institutional district like the county does. So,
Would land use more pick up the subtle nuances of different options that are available or different things that happen as opposed to an ordinance?
yeah, the example in here, the land uses are, defined in their code and are kind of simplified. They don't correlate necessarily to the land uses from their comp plan. So, you have different land uses in your code than this. And so it would not be a small undertaking to recreate that, but it could be done. We could use the land uses from your code and come up with something comparable to how that's displayed. So those are two, options: potential text amendment to address the structure of the buffer yard requirements, if you will, to change it from zoning to land use, or come up with specific standards for drive-throughs that have a buffer yard component as a standard similar to what's in the example here. Or, again, we just stay vigilant during the next project that comes forward, and again, keep our neighbors in mind. And
Well, do we have some kind of guideline or standards that we utilize for site plan?
we do.
So when drawing that up, can't we simply identify another line item in there that says, hey, let's address buffer yard areas to adjacent municipalities?
Yeah, I could look at that.
That's a simple change. That's not an ordinance change. That's not a big to-do, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't involve 5 tables. No.
This just gets too confusing when you have all the tables and the cross-sections and this one, and what is this one actually called? And we don't have the same, references to which zonings we have between the municipalities, so there is no cross-reference in this one. So what do we really do? Well, let's take a site plan. Let's say when we have these adjacent properties to differing municipalities, we have to address them a little more diligently, be a little more cautious about what we're doing in those areas.
Sure.
How would the rest of the commission feel?
This is all just my opinion,
That's why I'm asking
Scott,
for
I
other
think you're
opinions.
right on the money here. There's no reason to create a problem that can be addressed with a single line in reviewing site plans. It's something we have to look at. It would be caught ahead of time, and it'll remind us to review when it's here in front of this commission. So I think it's a simple fix for any possible problems in the future. I like it.
Anybody else? I like simple myself, so I'm all in on this.
Yep, this is just information, so. That's enough for me.
Okay, in that case, we'll move on to item number 3, discussion and direction of staff related to ordinance amending section 510-63 regarding non-conforming structures and setback requirements. What do you got, Orin?
So this, again, I summarized the sort of previous discussions on this and have provided this potential fix for our older areas in the community as it pertains to accessory structures. So the issue that we noted at a previous meeting was that when you have an existing non-conforming structure, it can currently, with the language in the code today, be replaced in kind, like for like. But the issue there is in the same location and at the same size. If you had more room for more accessory structure, you can't add on away from the lot line to make it bigger, and you can't make it more conforming necessarily by moving it in a foot or two just because you have room to do that. You just replace it where it's at with something of the same size. That's what you're allowed today to do. And so the proposed fix here is to add language to section 510-63 non-conforming structures by specifically adding to letter B a number 4 that states a footprint and size of legal non-conforming garage or a garage given blanket conforming status per section 510-63A that does not meet current setback requirements may be altered provided the new structure or addition does not encroach further into required setbacks than the current structure and meets all other zoning requirements. Precautions determined on a case-by-case basis by the building inspector shall be taken to reduce the possibility of fire damage to nearby structures. So this is kind of per the, I guess, preference of the building inspector going back to the language that was a little bit more permissible prior to our most recent adopted version of the non-conforming structures section. So in this case, this is specific to a non-conforming garage in this instance. So that I believe that was at the root of our discussion, was that we were talking about the accessory structure garages in the older area of the community. And so this is a fix for that particular issue. You would now be able to, the footprint and size are still going to be dictated by your current accessory structure standards. That's not going to change. So.
That would be in kind with the lot size too, correct?
Correct. So that doesn't change. But if you had a building that was, a foot off the lot line, now you could be 2 or 3 feet, whatever, off the lot line, even though the setback might be 10 feet. As long as you're meeting this requirement. And then there was also a request to add language regarding an encroachment agreement, so I added that as number 5. So it says, an encroachment agreement approved to form by the village attorney shall be recorded with the Walworth County Register of Deeds office prior to reconstruction or improvement of a non-conforming structure that continues to encroach on another property. So again, in that instance, if you're over the lot line by inches or a foot, you could still replace that accessory structure in place, subject to that agreement taking place and being recorded so that it's on record and tracks with the property.
Am I to understand it, subject to that being agreed upon by the property of whom you're encroaching on?
That's correct. So, and then the approval of the agreement to form is, by the attorney, is just, the village is not becoming a party to that agreement at all. You're just making sure that it says what you need it to say and doesn't throw in anything unnecessary. So that's what that means.
And the best part about this is just reverting back to something.
We'd just be looking for direction to come back with a draft ordinance for a public hearing.
I would make a motion that to direct staff to bring this back to the planning commission for a public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And that is that. So, do we have any other recommendations for future agenda items? I see where there's 5 things listed here. Did any of those need to be discussed?
I just want to explain real quickly, I added that first item under the list, Plan Development District Final Approval Process. That's simply a housekeeping item that came to our attention. There's some conflicting language in the ordinance that makes it questionable whether the village board also needs to approve the final development plan when we do plan development districts. They do have to approve the general development plan, so I brought this to the village board last week to ratify some prior approvals by the Plan Commission, and they said they want us to address the ordinance so Plan Commission has final approval authority. So it's really just a housekeeping item that you guys will see probably the first time next month.
There is one other thing I wanted to add that's not on here in regards to the Magic Touch and the facade grant. I think we put text in there that if we did not approve with the multicolor with the lower part being painted, the upper part not being painted, that we could bring that back and possibly recommend to them to paint the upper part. I would like to readdress that because I think the building stands out and it shouldn't. So I don't know how we can go about that, but I believe we did put language into the approval that we can have them come back.
Okay, we'll take a look at what was said during that approval and what's in the minutes.
Anything else for future agenda items? No? In that case, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. I'll second it.
Aye.